What's the worst thing that has ever happened to you in your part-time job? You may have been caught skipping a shift, made to do some horrible tasks, or maybe had a mean boss. Well, that is nothing compared to what happened at my work. I was framed for a crime that I didn't commit and almost ended up in jail. It was just a normal Saturday at work, and I was having to stand in one of the galleries, keeping an eye on the visitors and answering questions. The museum has finds from all over the world. There are rare statues, priceless jewelry, and mountains of gold coins. Some people might find museums boring, but there are some pretty impressive items there, and some of them are worth a lot of money. Part of my job involves walking around and making sure that nothing suspicious is going on. That day at work, there was a group of French tourists looking around. I heard them and recognized their accents straight away. I was so pleased to hear some real French people, and even better, I could understand a bit of what was being said. So I decided to follow them and listen in on their conversation. I hid behind a big Roman statue as they stood chatting, and I was so happy when I started to pick up some of their words. They were looking at some small glass vases on display and saying how impressive they were. Then, one of them said a word I remembered, but couldn't quite remember what it meant. It was voler. As I was listening in, one of them moved closer to a vase to take a photo of it, and they set off an alarm. It was so loud, everyone in the museum turned and looked. The poor tourists looked so embarrassed. They kept apologizing in French and English to me. I went over to the vase and reset the alarm. When I turned around, I saw the tourists running out of the museum. I was sad that they had left so quickly. I was hoping to listen in to more of their conversation. Perhaps they had been frightened by the alarm. It also bugged me that I couldn't think what one of the words were that they kept saying. Later that day, I was thinking about it, and I remembered what voler meant. It meant steal. I couldn't believe it. They were talking about stealing one of the vases. I stopped what I was doing and ran as fast as I could to the security guard's office. I knocked on the door and waited impatiently for him to let me in. Gary, the head of security, eventually opened the door. I rushed in and started garbling about the tourists and how I had followed them to listen into their conversation, and how I had been secretly learning French and hadn't told anyone, and how those tourists were planning to steal one of the vases. Gary listened to me intently. Then he told me not to worry. I was so angry. How could he not be worried? He told me to get back to work and that he would look into it. That afternoon, we were so busy that I soon forgot all about what had happened. At the end of my shift, I went to my locker and got my bag ready to go home. As I was heading out, one of the French tourists came back into the museum and approached me. He asked me for directions to the train station, but there was something shifty about him, and I didn't believe him. I thought he was back again to try and steal that vase. I tried to keep him talking for as long as possible, hoping that Gary would see him on the security camera and come and investigate. But Gary didn't come, and the tourist left. I'd had enough by then and just wanted to go home. As I went to leave the museum, though, an alarm went off. It was weird. I didn't know that there were alarms by the doors. Gary came running towards the door and shouted out, "Stop!" Then I realized that Gary was shouting at me, and behind him was my manager, and he looked really angry. I was so confused. Why were they running towards me? My manager asked me to open my handbag. Why did he want to look in there? I unzipped it and let the security guard look inside. In it was an alarm, like the one which was on the vase. I had no idea how it had gotten there. My manager told me that the vase had been stolen a few minutes ago, but the alarm hadn't gone off as it had been removed. I told him that one of the tourists must have stolen the vase and planted the alarm in my bag as he had left the building. He had distracted me by asking for directions, when really, he was just trying to get me in trouble for a crime that he committed. Of course, he didn't believe me. He believed the security guard instead. That was when I started to get upset. I was only in this stupid job to save up to go to college. And look what it had led to. The manager escorted me to the security office and locked me in there while they called the police. I screamed and shouted that I was innocent and that I needed to be let out, but no one came. Eventually, the police arrived and they started to question me. I couldn't believe that they were making all of this fuss over a vase. Then, one of them let slip that the vase was worth millions. I had no idea a vase could be worth so much. They told me that I was free to go, but there would be an investigation, and they would be searching my house for the vase. My parents turned up to collect me, and they were so angry. I tried to explain to them what had happened, but they didn't listen at all. When we got home, I went to my room as I was told, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to get out and prove my innocence, so I waited until I could hear my parents were busy, and I snuck out of the house. I could hear them shouting after me, but I ignored them and started to run. I headed to the train station as I knew I needed to catch those tourists before they left town with the vase. When I got to the station, it was really busy. It was rush hour and there were people everywhere. I went to the top of a staircase and looked around, studying the crowd. Then I saw them. The group of tourists were about to get on a train. I didn't know what to do next as I hadn't thought that far ahead, so I did the only thing I could think of. I pointed at them and shouted to everyone that they were thieves and needed to be stopped. But no one did anything. People just looked at me or walked past. So I carried on shouting, but it was too late. The tourists got onto the train and it pulled out of the station. I sank to the floor and started to cry. Then I heard someone calling my name. It was my parents. I couldn't believe they had found me. They ran up to me and I braced myself to be told off. They didn't shout at me though. If anything, they looked scared. They told me that I had been called to the police station and we had to go right away. The drive to the police station felt so long. I couldn't believe I was about to be arrested for a crime that I didn't do. When we got there, the police got me to sit in an interview room by myself. They kept me waiting for ages until a policeman came in and sat down. He told me that I was cleared of all charges. They had found the vase, and they knew I had nothing to do with stealing it. I asked them how they had caught the tourists when they were already on the train to leave the town. But he told me that he couldn't talk about it as they were still investigating. I was released and allowed to go home. My parents were in the waiting room, and my mom started crying when I saw her. They apologized so much for believing that I could have been a thief. As upset as I had been, I forgave them. They wanted to take me home, but I convinced them to drop me off at the museum first. I needed to speak to my boss about what had happened. When I got to the museum, I saw police cars outside. This didn't surprise me as they were still investigating, but then something really shocking happened. The police were bringing a man out of the museum in handcuffs, and it wasn't who I thought it would be. It was the security guard, Gary. They put him into one of the police cars, then drove off. I was so shocked. I didn't know what to do. He was so nice. And now it looked like he was the one being framed for the crime. Then I heard someone calling my name. It was my manager who came running out to speak to me. He told me that Gary hadn't been framed. Gary was the one who had stolen the vase. And to make it worse, he was the one who had tried to frame me. Apparently, when the police were investigating, they had found out that Gary had a criminal record and lied to get a job at the museum. They soon worked out that he had stolen the vase and erased the camera footage so no one would know it was him. He had stolen the vase, then went into my locker and hid the alarm in my bag, framing me for his crime. The tourist coming back to the museum and asking for directions was just a coincidence. I was so shocked. I would never have suspected him of being a criminal. He had seemed so trustworthy. That was a few weeks ago. And now things are back to normal. My job is going really well. My manager feels so guilty about what happened that he is super nice to me. He has even said that I can have as many shifts as I want when I come back from college in the holidays. But there was something that I couldn't stop thinking about. If the tourists were innocent, why were they using the word voler? I looked it up. I realized that the word can mean steal, but it could also mean to fly. That was when I realized what was on the vase. It was a picture of some birds in flight. That was what they had been talking about. I realized I still have a way to go before I can say that I understand French. Have you ever jumped to a conclusion and it turned out you were really wrong? Or has something really bad happened to you in your job? Let me know below. I'd love to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe.